there's kind of two guiding principles that I always look at whenever I'm training someone is one, when 20 years from now, what type of life does that individual want to live? Dietary fats increase nutrient absorption. They provide a source of energy. And the third thing is if you look at some research studies, especially if you're hypocaloric, if you go hypocaloric along with really low dietary fat, it can affect your sex-based steroids. So, I think flexibility training is the most underappreciated aspect of physical training. This is almost universal across the board. The athletes I work with, probably 95% of them totally neglect any sort of flexibility, range of motion training, and that compounds so many issues.
Welcome to the Kurisko and Company podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Kurisko. Our guest today is Sean Casey. Sean is a certified strength and conditioning coach and a registered dietitian. He has bachelor's degrees in both kinesiology and nutrition. Sean works with individuals ranging from middle and high school athletes to elite professionals, including Olympic athletes, as well as everyday people trying to improve health and performance. His expertise has been sought out internationally, and he has traveled to over 15 countries, helping clients reach their full potential. Sean serves as Chief Science Officer at the Sports Pharmacy Network and is founder of Performance Journey RX. Welcome, Sean. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, it was an absolute pleasure to be on and joining you, Dr. Lee Kurisko.
Good. We've been looking
excited for what's going on. It's always a fun conversation, so I look forward to it.
Yeah, so I've been looking forward to it too. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about what exactly you do?
So I do a lot of different things, but I would say if I have to kind of summarize everything together is I'm passionate about helping people pursue excellence in their life. Whether that means, hey, we're going for an Olympic medal, or if that's like, hey, I want to be every day more active so I can run around with my kids or grandkids. I think that is really neat. Or if it's the business professional looking to have more energy, feel a little bit sharper throughout the day.
And so you integrate both nutrition and exercise to achieve that goal.
Yeah, that I do. I always look at things in a very holistic manner. And to give a little bit of background for listeners in terms of how I got into this was 20 years ago when I was going to the University of Wisconsin, I originally thought I was going to be a physical therapist. And I job shadowed between my freshman and sophomore year with a physical therapist. And I realized the only time I enjoyed it was when an athlete came in that was hurt. And all of a sudden I have this light bulb moment, wait a minute, I just got excited because an athlete is hurt. What is wrong with this? No athlete wants to be hurt. So at that time, I was age 20. I made two goals for myself. I wanted to be the youngest strength conditioning coach in NFL history. And my other goal was to attend the Olympics to watch athletes I work with compete on the physical training side of things. I realized my goals were probably similar to a lot of people entering my profession. So I was trying to figure out what would make myself a little bit more different. And I always look at things, or I always try to look at things holistically, what could make myself a little bit different, what parts are missing. And that's when I decided to pick up a degree in dietetics to go along with my degree in kinesiology. That way I'd be able to serve individuals from both the nutritional aspect, the physical aspect, and, contribute to that well-rounded outcome for the client or patient.
Yeah, it seems like a perfect complement to have both kinesiology and nutrition as a background. I've been sort of a student of exercise my whole life. I first picked up a barbell when I was 14, which was, I hate to admit, 52 years ago, which is kind of crazy. But
you don't look it though. You don't look it.
Oh, thank you. And I've read up a lot about it, and I'm sort of constantly trying to parse out what is the best approach for, what I want to achieve, which is maintain some strength, some muscularity, minimize injuries, and feel good. But there's a lot of different approaches out there. And can you encapsulate what your approach is?
When it comes to the physical training side of things, and I can appreciate how you've been passionate about it since a young age. I think how I originally got into it, I was watching Rocky IV, and I was just enthralled with the process. That's what brought me into the process. But in terms of my approach from a training, I don't believe, one size necessarily fits all. I'm always passionate about what is the individual's end goals that they're going towards. If I'm lifting with somebody who's going to be a football athlete, that's very different than someone who's, wants to be a competitive 5K, runner,
Mhm.
on that level. So I always look at there, but there's kind of two guiding principles that I always look at whenever I'm training someone is one, what is when 20 years from now, what type of life does that individual want to live?
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is there's a lot of training I think that people do. And I was guilty of this as well when I was younger. It's like you train for the bigger muscles, you really don't pay much attention to your body. And then you realize, well, down the road, that's going to catch up to you.
Mhm.
So I always think about what can we do to build true health for the client? Because we know that 20 years, I'll just say, let's say I'm working with a professional athlete, and my goal for them is that 20 years after their career is over, so now they're 45, 50, they can still bend over to pick up their kids. Because if they can't enjoy the simple aspects of life, life's going to get really challenging for them. So again, I want to have that health 20 years down the road. And then I also look at too is what do they have to do right now to be successful in their sport or in whatever they're passionate about. So I kind of use those as my two guiding things. What can we do to be successful today? But equally, if not more important, what can we do so they're successful and healthy 20 years down the road from now?
Yeah, I think that what you said there, the importance of that cannot be understated. Actually,
Yeah.
when they, when they do studies on weight training, they generally show that weight training is a safe sport.
Mm.
But I mean, compared to football or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you're in the weight training game for a long period of time, you realize that virtually everybody accumulates injuries.
Yeah.
Uh, and there are some activities that are worse than others, like a conventional bench press. A lot of people run into problems. I mean, I got to the point where it's not worth it. It just hurts my shoulders too much. So I do a lot of dumbbell presses instead. That greater degree of freedom seems to really help. But I look back lifting weights, and I sort of wish I could take back some of those reps that I did that were probably way too heavy, and maybe not done with this good form. Um, I was just working out this morning, and I did a bit of a shoulder arm workout, and I'm not nearly as strong as I used to be, but I'm still doing okay. I was doing some seated overhead uh, dumbbell presses,
Uh-huh.
and um, uh, I used 55s, and it was pretty good. I could probably do 65, 70, but I think it really helps a lot to just really control the repetition. What I find is like sometimes sort of like going a little bit slower through the mechanically disadvantaged part of the range of motion actually really taxes the muscle. And, a lighter weight suddenly becomes a heavy weight,
Yeah.
and yet without all that grinding on your joints. And I think that that's a big deal.
I think that is absolutely huge. And you hit the nail on the head is sometimes you go, so heavy in weight that your form gets wonky. You're now not necessarily in the preferred strength curves. And before you know it, you blow out a shoulder
Yeah.
on things. And even too, I always look at it as, yes, let's say if somebody blows out their shoulder or knee or whatever it is, and you do have those freak things where the weight gets somehow slips and something catches funny. But a lot of that I feel like is just that general wear and tear that happens forever, and then you have something the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? And it all
Hmm.
goes down. And so that's where I always think about is if we're using weights, we're using good form, we're taking advantage of those weak points to really kind of shore those up. It just builds such a strong, engine to drive the car through. So
Hmm.
it's like
Hmm.
I think people jump to the high octane fuel right away, and in the process, they miss out on little things along the processes that can really set them up for long term growth, not only from a strength standpoint, but also for that longevity curve aspect as well. And I totally hear you on like the bench presses things. I find for a lot of people, switching over to a dumbbells makes it a lot easier. And two, I always look at the body. Grown up, a lot of people are like very much into more the show type muscles. The biceps, the chest, the
Hmm.
front part. And yeah, that can do well from them for a while, but you start to see where all of a sudden you have somebody with the rounded shoulders,
Hmm.
their head's really far protruded. So I always think about what can we do to reverse that, so they can have that long successful career. Because we know if we get a stronger back, that, let's say if somebody loves doing bench press, if we have a stronger back, that's going to help with the bench press. It's going to help with things like deadlift, squat. So again, I always think about how can we correct some of the muscle imbalances. That way, the client, the athlete, can really demonstrate their full power potential over the long haul, not just in this very narrow band of their life, their training lifespan.
Yeah, I think you can run into a lot of problems if you're just doing a lot of benching. You don't balance it out by working the backside, with rows or pull-ups and stuff like that. Like I've had a lot of shoulder problems over the years, but the last couple of years, it's not been bad because I religiously do a little sequence for my rotator cuff. I mean, it's boring, but I mean, I think it really helps. The other thing that's helped me immensely is just a couple of minutes a day, just doing a dead hang from a bar, just a dead hang. And it opens up that coracoacromial arch over time. You have a little bit more room for your rotator cuff. And it's just made a huge difference, like way more difference than any kind of shoulder injections that I've had. No, it's like seriously. And of course, like the cost is, there's no cost at all.
It's the fun stuff. I think flexibility training is the most underappreciated aspect of physical training. People think about, hey, how fast can I go? How much am I lifting? How powerful, or if you're an endurance runner, it's like, hey, what's my endurance, my aerobic capacity, all there, which is all fine and great. But I find this is almost universal across the board. The athletes I work with, probably 95% of them totally neglect any sort of flexibility, range of motion training. And that compounds so many issues. And I always think about, let's say, even if you have an athlete who's doing a deadlift, if they're really stiff in the hips, one is they're probably not going to be able to get into a good position. Their back's going to be rounded, whatever, is a little bit more compromised. But two, the amount of energy they have to expend just to get into that starting position, because they have to work so hard, for lack of better words, to pull their body into that position. It just kind of went there, versus if somebody has good range of motion, they're flexible, they can just naturally drop into those ideal starting positions. And once there, since you're in more of that power, more of a powerful position, you can now lift more simply by having a better range of motion. And I think that's one area. So I love the fact that you're doing, the hangs on there, because I think they're so huge.
Yeah. I mean, it's flexibility stuff is kind of boring, but I agree. I think it's important. And when I was younger, I used to be, really, really flexible. I mean, I used to be able to do like, full splits, front and back and side to side. But the goal now, I was doing some Taekwondo and stuff at the time, but the goal now is not necessarily to be like a contortionist, but just to maintain normal ranges of motion. And as you get older, it's amazing how that seems to creep away. All the more reason to do it. Excuse me. But, one thing that I observe every single day, as a radiologist, I read a lot of joint MRIs and, spine MRIs. And you get these people coming in with, horrible shoulder pain or back pain or whatever. These people have maybe never exercised a day in their life. And then you can see that even still, they've got all this sign of mechanical wear in their body. The discs are compressed. They've got disc herniations. They've got bone spurs. Rotator cuff is torn, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it delivers a message that, I mean, working out is great, but as you get older, you got to remember that you're using parts that are just, as part of the natural aging process, are tending to wear out. So you don't want to overload these structures that are wearing out and make things worse.
Yeah. You hit on a really great point, Dr. Lee, is I find, especially this time of the year as we're going into the New Year's, it's like I find for a lot of clients, they haven't had much activity for a little while. Maybe they have a desk job, so it's not a whole lot of physical activity. And they go from, for lack of better words, a 0 up to 100 miles an hour, and they try to do it overnight. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big thing, as you're familiar with your background, is that whole tissue loading side of things. You don't have to go super heavy or crazy number of reps to have a good stimulus for the muscles. I think it was Ronnie Coleman, the famous bodybuilder, who said something, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but had a quote of something along the lines of, go for stimulate the muscle, don't annihilate the muscle. There's a
Oh,
quote
that
there,
was
which
Lee Haney. That
Lee
was
Haney,
Lee
yeah,
Haney.
okay, Lee Haney. I
Lee
knew it was
Haney.
one of
Yeah. Yeah.
the bodybuilders, but I think there's so much wisdom in that. Thing is, the goal is to stimulate the muscle. That way, you can, for lack of better words, live to fight another day, as opposed to just totally annihilating it, and then you're on the shelf for the next 3 months, and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I can't do this, and you can get yourself into a rut. So using that slow, gradual approach without trying to kill your muscles, I think, again, looking at both the short and the long term gain, it's better. And I think about, again, reflecting on some of the stuff that I did early in my career training wise, or some of the clients who shared with me once they started working with me was, they would try to max out on every workout. And yeah, you might get that a little bit right away, but also you plateau, and also you start going down.
Mhm.
And so just being able to appreciate that entire process is absolutely critical.
Yeah. Actually, Ronnie Coleman is a case study in not doing what you recommend.
The opposite way. He looks rough
Because
now.
he's had like 10 or 12 back surgeries,
Yeah.
and I think he can barely walk now.
Yeah.
And there was some interview I saw where he was talking about he squatted 800 pounds, 4 reps or something like that. And he's there. His only regret was he didn't go for the 5th rep, or, and now he is like practically in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And I think Ronnie Coleman is probably a little bit younger than me, actually.
Yeah.
And he's really incapacitated. So I think it's really important to be cognizant of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts? Like, if someone is trying to optimize their physical conditioning, they're just an average person, um, not an athlete per se. How much time commitment do you think they need to get optimal results over the course of a week?
Over the course of a week. So when I'm working with a new client, I'm always looking at what is their starting base. Because if someone's coming from a very sedentary lifestyle and just starting fresh, I think you can get a lot of benefit just doing, between 20 to 30 minutes per day, depending on what their starting level is. But let's say if you have somebody who's been physically active, in one form of life or another, but they're more active. I find for a lot of clients, if we're able to do 2 to 3 strength sessions a week, again, maybe in that, depending on their goals, what they're going for, in that, say 45 to 60 minutes, or even, 20 to 30, again, depending on what their end goal is. And then complementing it with some aerobic training, be it on the bike. I'm a big fan of like the rower. I
Mhm.
think those can be really good. I'm a fan of whatever gets people moving more actively, especially as you're hitting the middle age. What I find with a lot of people is especially if they're going for like, hey, they're going for a powerlifting meet, that obviously looks much different than, 5K. But for the people who are looking for more of that general fitness, I find that people tend to gravitate like, hey, I just like to do aerobic training, so I'm just going to do that. Or I just like to lift, so they do that. And I think there is so many benefits to doing both of those that a lot
Mhm.
of people miss. So for me, and you may be similar, I love lifting weights. I can lift weights all day. It's what I'm passionate about. But I realize, if you look at a lot of your longevity studies, having a healthy VO2 max is a very strong correlation to longevity, lifespan, a lot of these cardiometabolic health conditions. And so, like, I still put in, even though I don't like it, 20 minutes, what I'm doing now is 20 minutes 2 times a week of a higher intensity cardio, because I know it's so important for my health. And then again, then I lift, 3 to 4 days a week. And that's how I try to structure with clients. So if I'm working with a client who enjoys doing more of the aerobic stuff, like, okay, let's do that 3 to 4 days a week, but let's have 2 days of resistance training. And
Mhm.
likewise, if they're more of I love lifting weights, I'm like, okay, that's great. Let's do that, 2 to 4 days, depending on what your schedule looks like. But also let's make sure we include 2 days of having a little bit of that cardiovascular built into it, along with just like a baseline of, some flexibility in that aspect. What's your
Yeah, I
thoughts?
think I think that can be super productive what you're describing. And the thing about weight training, one of the things I really like about weight training is a little bit can go a long way.
Yeah.
Uh, like you can do these extremely abbreviated programs that
Yeah.
take like an hour or less a week and get like extremely good results.
It's, yeah, impressive.
Like I'm sure you're familiar with like Mike Mentzer.
Hmm.
He was an advocate of, really brief training. And one of his proteges, Dorian Yates, who became a multi-time Mr. Olympia, he was only working out like 3 or 4 hours a week, which, I mean, for like a pro athlete, I mean, that's like mind boggling. And yet he was the best in the world. Now, of course, the thing that's confusing is then you get other people that have benefited from like these massive volumes of working out. And I think that that's where personal experimentation comes in. Like, I know, if I worked out 2 hours a day, like weights, or 3 hours a day, I would not get anything out of it. Like right now, what I'm doing, and it's probably might even be more than I really need, is I'm doing about 4 1-hour workouts a week. Now, I know I don't really need to do that much, but I like doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also mix in some cardio. But here's the question: is it possible to do too much cardio?
Yeah. I think, especially depending on the type of cardio you're doing, I think there's definitely like a balance where you can kind of start overdoing on it. Again, all goal specific. I'll use, endurance runners just as an example. There's exceptions to the rule, but I always look at, be it the knees or any of your joints, is like a tire. Hopefully everything is aligned so the rubber just slowly goes out. But let's say if somebody has a hip instability where their landing mechanics are a little bit off, so now you're putting stress on joints that, in different ways that are normal. You see more like the chronic injuries creep up in those athletes, I feel like, as opposed to more of your strength power athletes who have more of like a pulled hamstring or a blown out shoulder. So again, I always go in balance. And the other thing I always tell people too is, because I've worked with a lot of, endurance athletes, and they're phenomenal individuals in work ethics, is making sure that, going back to our earlier conversation, is that you're stimulating the muscle as opposed to annihilating the muscle. And if you're increasing intensity, roughly only increase it, be it the mileage or whatever you're doing, say 5 to 10% a week, so your body has a chance to adapt to it, for whatever your goals are. The other thing I always think about with, if you're doing more of like the more intense cardiovascular training, is, make sure you're kind of periodizing that throughout the year. Like, there's gonna be some periods of the year where you want to be a little bit more higher mileage. Then make sure you have times of the year where you're at more of a lower mileage and doing more of the, I always call it like stability training, but things to kind of strengthen up the stabilizing muscles of the hips or whatever it is. So that's how I always look at that balance. Similarly, I think you can do too much lifting on the other end too. The one area where I always tell people, if you want to do more of this, the more the merrier, is walking. That's the one thing I think you can do. Again, there's probably something at some level that has negative side effects, but that's always what I always tell people, like, hey, include as much walking as you want in the day, as long as it's not like sapping your time or energy from other things that you're passionate about.
Well, actually, years ago, I actually did some competitive bodybuilding. And of course, it's many years ago. But one of my strategies was, as I was trying to cut down and get lean, I didn't really change my weight training program that much. I at that time, I was doing like a 2 days on, 1 day off kind of thing, and rotating. I had 3 different workouts. I'd rotate through them. So I was like actually doing less than like a lot of my competitors, but I just felt like more was not going to help me.
Yeah.
But what I did to add to the calorie burn, besides just sort of restricting calories, is I just walked. And the strategy was, walking is low stress. You want to hit it hard in the weight room, and you want to get the advantage of burning the calories, but you don't want to wear yourself out. So I did a lot of walking, just walking to help get lean. So I think it's a good approach.
Yeah, it's so good. And I always think about too, when I'm working with individuals, is the concept of minimum effective dose. And that's why I always have to remind people of, we want a minimum effective dose for whatever what your given results are. Because if, again, I'm just making up numbers for the sake of conversation. Let's say you need to run for 30 minutes for whatever your goal is, or you need to lift for 10 sets for whatever those numbers are. I'm like, if that's what you need to do to achieve whatever your goal is, anything that you do above that is just adding wear and tear on your body that's going to catch up with you at some point or another. And and I would love to hear your thoughts on this because you have the experience with the bodybuilding, different things. Is I see so many people that by the time they step on stage, or maybe they're a week out from the show, or a week out from whatever that big competition is, all of a sudden they're getting sick a lot. All of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
they hurt themselves, so they're not able to perform as well as what they need to on the given day of competition, just because they add more fuel to the fire when you could have just had it on a very nice warm level.
Yeah. Well, actually, that triggers a few different thoughts, which is there's really no doubt, like overdoing it with exercise, which is not a problem for most people. But I know that I at times have kind of overdone it. And I remember going to a lecture once, and this guy was talking, Dr. James Laval, actually a really smart guy. He was talking about people that work out really hard, doing a lot of CrossFit and just really, really giving it hard all the time. They can run into a situation where they're not making any progress and they have chronically elevated cortisol. And so, of course, cortisol, raises blood sugar, and you could be in a circumstance where you're immune suppressed, you have high cortisol, you're actually interfering with your glucose metabolism, potentially even creating sort of a diabetic state by working out so hard. You talked about the minimum effective dose. I think that's a really interesting concept. Just a few weeks ago, I finished reading a book called The Time Savers Workout, a revolutionary new fitness plan that dispels myths and optimizes results. It's actually a really interesting book written by John Little, who was good friends with Mike Mentzer,
Really?
and is really into this hyper minimalist approach to working out. And he has his own facility, and he will typically, I think it's like, maybe as little as once a week, doing a whole body workout that literally takes minutes and produces an effect. And he has he talks about that minimum effective dose because you don't want to overwear your joints and whatnot.
Yeah.
And he uses a very interesting approach, which is that it's sort of there's one approach he uses where it's almost like an isometric thing. Like, say you're doing a leg press. Well, he has the person hold the leg press at the part where they're least mechanically advantaged and do a static hold for, I forget, it was 20 seconds or something. You take a break and then increase the weight and do it again. And keep increasing the weight and do these 20-second holds. And then as you're starting to lose the strength, he decreases it. And so like the whole thing takes like 3 minutes or something. And then he'll do like some kind of a back workout, some kind of a pushing upper body workout, and do this. And that's the whole workout for the week, which is a bit of a mind bender because it's like not much work at all. But he claims he gets results, which I think is very plausible. Yeah.
It's fascinating what the body will do with minimum training. I always think about even too. Now I'm looking a little bit more at sports as opposed to the general population we were talking about earlier. Is I've had so many clients where they be in the middle of their season of whatever their competitive sport is, and then you might only lift once, maybe twice a week, and it's very minimal. And it's interesting that you will see, you can see people who will still be making gains despite doing all the on court or on field or whatever that is, on a very small amount of actual physical training as more like touch points. And, I think that is a big thing. And then the other thing I always think about too, as we're talking about minimum effective dose and the body recoveries, is that other end of the equation with the food aspect of things.
Yeah.
Often I see people who's, when I look at just surface level at their training program, like, oh, like, from a sets rep standpoint, this looks totally fine, but they're completely smacked. They're like, oh man, I'm struggling to recover, this, that, or whatever. And then I start talking with them, looking more at like, okay, what's happening from a sleep standpoint, a stress management standpoint, and a food standpoint. And I find for most people, like, that ends up being the flying dumpster fire as opposed to the actual training program causing excessive fatigue. And I think that's where it's really important. And this is where, I remember talking to you previously, and that's why I really love your philosophy of doing that holistic, where you're looking at the food aspect of things, the training aspect. And I think that's why we hit it off on when we had our first conversations, just because there's a lot of overlap in terms of taking that approach.
Yeah, actually, just backtrack a little bit. In this book, he gives the example of these young athletes. He's from Canada. He's got some experience working with like junior A hockey players, which is just one
Okay.
step below the
Uh-huh.
NHL, and gives the example how, during the season, they're playing 2 or 3 games a week. And of course, when they're on the ice, they're really going hard. And then they have these practices where they may be doing like wind sprints on the ice and stuff and hitting the weight room. And despite all that effort, they're going backwards. Their performance is
Mm,
going backwards.
yeah.
And really what they need to do is just dial it way back and do better. But the nutritional side, I think is really, really huge. When I started getting into it, like really kind of optimizing my diet, I noticed I had a lot better endurance and stuff. How would you describe your approach to nutrition? Like, sort of what's the high level view of what you recommend to people?
Yeah, the high level view of what I recommend is really kind of two golden rules, or I should say three golden rules if I'm doing a diet for someone. I'm like, one, I want it to be minimally processed foods.
Hmm.
Two, I want it to be a variety of foods. And three, and this is probably the most important, is I want it to be a diet that that you actually enjoy and will follow,
Hmm.
on there. Because we can do as much on this level, but if you don't enjoy it, that's going to be a 2 week diet max, and then you're gonna,
Yeah.
jump off it. But you know, the biggest thing that I see that for a lot of the clients that I work with that has the most impact on their performance is one, getting enough calories in general. I find a lot of athletes undereat, not realizing how many they're burning through the day. And so that's always like the easy low hanging fruit. But the other low hanging fruit, I think you'll appreciate this, is there's such a fear of carbohydrates.
Yes.
It's wild. So
Yeah.
you're talking about
Yeah.
the CrossFit athletes earlier, like way back when. I don't know if it's still prevalent in CrossFit right now, but I remember a few years back, like it was like they were trying to do CrossFit on like a ketogenic type diet, and like
Hmm.
they're
Hmm.
just,
Yeah.
I mean, time again, it's like, going back to basic physiology, your carbohydrates are your high octane fuel. Like we got to be
Hmm.
pushing those.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I think, I've seen that both in the athletic world. Thankfully, I think it's getting a little bit better in the athletic world, but just even general population, I think there's still like a strong fear of carbohydrates, not,
Hmm.
for people who aren't able to differentiate, say your sugar bombs per se versus your whole foods, your potatoes, I feel bad for the white potato. I think it's I don't know your thoughts on this, so I don't want to put words in, but I'm a fan of a lot of these starchy things for people who are active. There's so many health benefits that I think have gotten missed over,
Hmm.
due to I don't want to say propaganda, but due to the misinformation that has
Yeah.
been out there.
Yeah, no, actually, I totally agree. The big problem is conflating sort of processed carbohydrates and whole food carbohydrates as being the same
Yeah.
thing.
Uh-huh.
A jelly bean and a kidney bean are processed by the body completely differently.
Yep.
And kidney beans are complex carbohydrates. They got a good load of protein, fiber, these phytonutrients that prevent cancer and stuff like that. They're really good for you, and people should not be shying away from them. And in fact, well, beans is a particularly good example
Yeah.
where the more you eat, the longer you're probably going to live.
Yeah.
And they have optimizing effects on your blood sugar. So I think carbohydrates are not to be feared. I was eating an extremely high carbohydrate diet and with really no ill effects, really improved endurance. It helped with my endurance. But I've been working away at this book for a while, and I was really big on like a really high carbohydrate diet, but it shows you how complicated nutrition can be. And initially I was thinking, well, we should try to be avoiding saturated fat for sure, but really going, even reducing like added polyunsaturated fats. But as I dig into it a little bit more, the research has evolved, and actually the monounsaturated fats and the polyunsaturated fats are actually good for you,
Mhm.
help with blood lipids,
Yep.
um, and also seem to have a beneficial effect on insulin control or glucose control, and are sort of neutral to maybe even a bit beneficial as far as weight management.
Yeah.
So, and actually I think this is really good news because we kind of push the whole food plant-based diet. Strictly speaking, an oil is a processed food, But it's good to know that something like olive oil and maybe some, a little bit of canola oil and soybean oil and stuff like that in your diet can make your food more palatable, and it just makes it easier for people.
Yeah. It's huge, and I think the one thing too that a lot of people don't necessarily, especially if they don't have a background in nutritional science, biochemistry, whatever it is, but a lot of those nutrients. So you mentioned the phytonutrients earlier that are in beans. I love the fact I'm a huge fan of beans, like so many
Yeah.
good benefits there. But the gut is so mind blowing to me. Like we know that the gut is acting as the second brain, via the vagal nerve. They're directly connected. We know the gut 70 to 80% of your immune system is in the gut. Most skin health issues are. I always tell people if you have a rash or something that keeps on coming back, regardless of creams or whatever, I'm like, it's not a skin issue, it's a gut health issue. If we can clean up the gut, a lot of skin issues will start to resolve for individuals. A lot of your phytonutrients require dietary fat to be absorbed by the body. So like when I see someone who has like, let's say they have a spinach salad or some sort of dark leafy green salad, and then they have the fat-free dressing on it. I'm like, your body, some of your carotenoids, I was drawing mine, like some of your carotenoids, which is like lutein and those type of things, those dark leafy greens. I'm like, they require dietary fat to be absorbed by the body. And it's not like dietary fats increase their absorption by 10 to 20%. It's like they increase their absorption by like 300 fold. Like it's a mammoth difference
Oh,
on the
really?
absorption of there. And that's what I was telling people. I'm like, the gut is so mind blowing to me. Like we know that the gut is, acting as the second brain, via the vagal nerve. They're directly connected. We know the gut 70 to 80% of your immune system is in the gut. Most skin health issues are. I always tell people if you have a rash or something that keeps on coming back, regardless of creams or whatever, I'm like, it's not a skin issue, it's a gut health issue. If we can clean up the gut, a lot of skin issues will start to resolve for individuals. Dietary fats increase nutrient absorption. They provide a source of energy. And the third thing is if you look at some research studies, especially if you're hypocaloric, if you go hypocaloric along with really low dietary fat, it can affect your sex-based steroids. So, I think it comes back to I always feel like the pendulum always swings from like one extreme and the other. And I think the age old, although it's boring, having that moderate approach with, making sure you're hitting each of those nutrient groups and combinations is extremely effective for both health as well as performance.
I did not realize that that little bit of fat actually increased the absorption of those nutrients by that much.
Yeah.
And so, I'm thinking that if you make a dressing, like there's one dressing I really like, it's got a tahini in it, which is that is sesame seed, I think. So it's fairly high in polyunsaturates, but it's so delicious that you put that on the salad, and you'll eat this giant bowl of salad like this big. So it's a good way to get the plant-based foods into people.
Yeah.
So I think that that's good news that a little bit of the right dietary fats can increase the palatability of your food, increase nutrient absorption, and won't necessarily create a problem as far as, blood sugar might be beneficial and sort of neutral to slightly positive. Now, I would say probably don't go crazy. Like don't put a cup of olive oil on your salad, because it's still super, super calorically dense. But I'm thinking that this is really good news for people because it can make things less restrictive. Yeah. And I think also the context is important because, it's one thing to make a nice dressing and put it on your big green salad. It's another thing if you're getting the oils within, packaged processed food coupled with a lot of refined carbohydrates, in which case that food is sort of hyperpalatable. It doesn't sort of trigger satiety sensation, and people will tend to overeat. So context is very important.
Yeah, no, context is so huge. And I need to go back. I said 300 fold. I meant to say 30 fold on there.
Oh, okay.
Like 10 to 30.
Still.
So 300 was still, as soon as I said that, I'm like, wait a minute. I think I added a zero on there, but still 10 to 30 fold is huge. But
it's huge.
And I think going back too is, I think this is one of the things that's happened in like with be it social media or just like how things are. I think foods get demonized. And this is where I see a lot of people. It's like, okay, protein is good. No, it's bad. Carbohydrates are good. No, they're bad. And I have so many clients I work with, they're so stressed out about, I can't eat anything because everything has something negative about it, as opposed to the moderation approach and realizing like, hey, it's whole food. So going back, I know like some of your seed oils have gotten such a bad rap, I feel like, in recent years. And it's like there's something very different versus I have a handful of nuts or seeds and I'm having oils from there, or extra virgin olive oil, or whatever it is, versus the oil that they're using at McDonald's. It's probably been fried with fries about 100 different times. Like, and I
Yeah.
think that's what gets lost in the shuffle for a lot of people. And that's where I always go back to is taking this whole food approach. I'm a huge fan of, the plant-based, dietary habits, and adding in, lean protein or, whatever it is, I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. And one of the things I really disagree with as far as this Maha movement is demonizing the seed oils, which basically are polyunsaturated oils. And I just listened to a very long interview with Walter Willett, who is a professor emeritus of nutrition at Harvard.
Harvard, yeah.
In fact, he's the most published and cited nutritional scientist in the world. So a
Mm-hmm.
super, super credible guy.
Yeah.
And he was bemoaning, and not sort of like hyperbolic or clickbaity in the way he addresses things, but just sort of saying that this push towards beef tallow as opposed to these polyunsaturates, it's a very negative move, because like it's clear cut that saturated fats promote cardiovascular disease. Like there's like really no meaningful debate on that. The research goes back to about 1910 on this. And to tell people to consume beef tallow rather than olive oil or whatever is a huge mistake. But yeah, I agree with you on that. Now, actually, one thing I want to ask you about, what's your take on protein? Because I know a lot of people get really worked up that you just can't get enough of it.
I always tell people, I it's so interesting. I have some people that I work with where it's like they need 150 grams or whatever it is, and they're trying to get like 300 grams a day. So it's like
Mhm.
they're getting so much protein in their diet. They actually, and we know that protein tends to get people like more satiety, for a lot of individuals I work with. But it's like they're getting so much protein in it, it's actually driving down their appetite so much is that they're not getting in all the other nutrients they
Mhm.
need for their, given goals. If I had to make a very, very general recommendation, based off what I've seen in the research, roughly zero point 0.7 grams of protein per pound of whatever your goal body weight is.
Sorry, repeat that. 20. What did you say?
Zero point 0.7 grams
0.7. Yeah.
per pound of body weight. With most research I'm looking at is where you really kind of maximize your protein synthesis levels as it relates to musculoskeletal health. So that would mean if somebody's weighs 200 pounds, getting in 140 grams of protein from there. So that's generally where I go at. There's conditions here and there where I may change them. I know for one time there was a lot of thought that protein may decrease bones or kidney health. Most research I've seen in the last 10 years kind of disproved some of those myths. So I'm comfortable there. Like I said, I see the biggest thing is, and I'm going to pick on the guys who, the meatheads, which was me when I was that age, but they tend to try to get like 300 grams of protein when they only needed 150 or 200, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And then I do have a lot of female athletes that I work with who, or even elderly people where they're eating really low protein, where they might only be getting, say, 30 to 50 grams a day. And so I'll work to increase those up to, more of a healthier level. And generally speaking, getting a little bit more protein in them, they feel better, throughout their day.
Yeah, I mean, when I was bodybuilding, I mean, I was eating chicken breast 6 times a day, thinking I need all that protein. But there's good research from Stanford a number of years ago where they, metabolic ward type of studies, they came up with a number of 0.8 grams per kilo of optimal body weight, which is really quite low. But the research has evolved, and from the point of view of like if you're trying to sort of optimize athletic performance, it's probably get it better to get maybe as much as 1.6
Yeah,
grams per
1.6 is,
kilogram,
yeah.
which for me at 185 is about 130 grams. And I don't always hit that target, but I seem to be doing okay. And you can also, and you can get, well, you can get a pretty high protein intake just from plants. It's not that hard, you know.
Hmm.
And the amino acid, just as long as you're eating some whole grains and some nuts and seeds and legumes, you're getting the full complement of amino acids.
Yeah, you're
But
balancing them
I
out.
think it's a negative to go much beyond that,
Hmm.
because then you're just displacing other healthy foods that you should be eating.
Yeah, absolutely. And so 1.6 grams per kilogram, it will be about zero point 0.7 grams per pound.
Yeah,
So we're right on the same
yeah.
thing with there. The interesting thing too is, I think about lentils. I'm a
Mm,
huge fan of lentils. Like some of those things, they're super high in fiber. Again, look at most of the diets and, with most people, especially here in the United States, I'm like, most of them are protein could probably be low, but more importantly, like fiber intake
mhm,
is so dreadfully low in almost I can't remember the last time that a new client has started up with me where their fiber intake was actually in if I have a client whose fiber intake is over 20 grams a day, my mind is just completely blown.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so, I mean, that's the nice thing, be it lentils, be it beans. I mean, there's so many nutrients. And this is, kind of segueing a little bit into gut health is the gut is so mind blowing to me. Like we know that the gut is, acting as the second brain, via the vagal nerve. They're directly connected. We know the gut 70 to 80% of your immune system is in the gut.
Mm,
Most skin health issues are, I always tell people, if you have a rash or something that keeps on coming back, regardless of creams or whatever, I'm like, it's not a skin issue, it's a gut health issue. If
mhm,
we can
mhm.
clean up the gut, a lot of skin issues will start to resolve for individuals. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely hear you in terms of the importance of getting the fruits, the vegetables there. And when you're able to get something that's, a good source of protein along with it being a good source of fiber, it's like a double win there.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up because it is a huge issue. The numbers that come to mind for meeting sort of the basic requirement for fiber set by the US government, which is probably too low, um, it's on average, it's only 3% of the population that hits that benchmark.
Yeah.
And it's about 6% of women that hit the benchmark. And rounded to the nearest whole number, it's 0% of the US male population.
I would believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that fiber is so important, and people are stressing out about their protein, and yet really they need fiber in the worst way possible. And like, you know, getting adequate dietary fiber is even tied into things like brain health and preventing dementia, because you get the dietary fiber, the microbes are breaking down these complex fibers and creating these short chain amino acids which circulate through your whole body, and you even find them in the cerebral spinal fluid.
Yeah.
So it's profoundly important. Well, that's a kind of a good segue into the next thing I want to ask you about is what is your philosophy on supplements?
Supplements, my philosophy on supplements is one, I'm a dietitian, so I'm always going to go with the food first approach on things. You're never going to create in a supplement, I mean, a lot of these plants have like 8,000 chemicals in them. Like, I don't think people realize how complex from a biochemistry standpoint these are. And so, again, I'm always going to go with the food first approach. That being said, I know there are things that are really hard to get from food alone for a lot of clients I work with. The one that pops in my mind, especially this time of the year, we both live in the Midwest and the northern latitudes, is vitamin D. If you're trying to get vitamin D from food alone, if you're getting it from fortified milk, you're probably drinking like 20 pints of milk a day, which I don't think anyone is. So, I mean, there's something like there. Another one that I find with a lot of my clients struggle on getting is enough magnesium in the day. So even if
Mhm.
you're trying to hit the RDA amount, that's, roughly 420 milligrams, depending on gender, most individuals struggle to get that from food alone because they're not eating much dark leafy greens. They don't eat many pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds is an amazing source of magnesium, and they don't have like much almonds or some of those foods. So in those cases, I'll add more magnesium into their things. So like I said, there's certain nutrients that with clients, again, I'll try to push food first, but I'm also a realist. I know someone's if like there's no way I'm going to be eating that amount. I'm like, okay, here's a backup there that I've had clients do really well there. The other one that I do a lot of, and actually, I shouldn't say it surprises people, but the reason why I recommend it surprises a lot of people is creatine. So
Mm.
again, going back to your bodybuilding background, I'm sure you've heard creatine multiple times. in there. And most people think when they think about creatine, they think about muscular power, strength, endurance, those things. And I always tell people the fact that creatine increases your muscular strength, power, all those type of things. I'm like, for me, that's the icing on the cake. Where I'm more fascinated with creatine is its effect on brain health. There's right now, and there may be more now, but the last time I did a research check on PubMed, there's 7 different published studies showing creatine improve symptoms of related to mood, be it depression or something of that nature. So that's really fascinating. There's also research showing that creatine helps you if you have to kind of think quicker on the spot, especially if you're short on sleep. Creatine's been shown beneficial there. And then the other area that affects, this can sound interesting, but affects everyone from your high school athlete all the way up to your elderly is concussions. There was a research study. It was done in Canada. I want to say McMaster University, but don't quote me on that. But it was one of the Canadian universities where they actually found that individuals, adolescents who had traumatic brain injuries, if they gave them higher dose creatine after that TBI, the symptoms were less severe and they resolved much quicker. So, that's where creatine provides that source of kind of instant energy, which can be sacrificed in traumatic brain injury. And so that's the other one that usually surprises, like I say, it doesn't surprise people because they're like, oh, Sean works with athletes. Of course, he's going to go with creatine. But they actually get surprised why I recommend it. I actually recommend it because it has so many brain health benefits that, and like all the others, just like cool side benefits to me.
Yeah, you educated me there. I picked up some things that I was not aware of. I have not used creatine for a number of years. And I know that when I did, I really felt it did kind of give my workouts a boost. But I have 2 concerns. One is that apparently a lot of these creatine products are high in heavy metals. So I gather it's really important that you get like a third-party verified,
That is huge.
quality product.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, you can tell me if this has been dispelled or not. My concern is that the body functions on feedback loops, and when you provide something that it normally produces, it tends to produce less of it. And my concern is, like, if you did take creatine for a prolonged period, would you lose the ability to produce enough if you stopped? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, or do you know if there's any research on that?
That's always a great question. I have not seen any research where they have shown, because definitely the negative feedback loop is so big and so many of these things that people are. That's what a quick side branch, but that's where when I see all these people doing things like peptides, SARMs, straight hormones, like. That's what I was telling people. I'm like, you got to know what you're doing there. And that's beyond my scope there. But I'm like, you see so many bad things because they cut off the feedback loop. And that is something that also to take into consideration with creatine. That being said, I have not seen any study that has indicated that it will turn off the body's natural production of creatine, especially once you stop taking it. I think the human body on average makes between 1 to 2 grams of creatine naturally per day. Between glycine and there's 2 other amino acids that it synthesizes out. I'm drawing, I think glycine, leucine. I'm missing 2 of them, but this research, like I said, I have not seen that supported on the research that it does there. And then I think anecdotally, with the number of people who have taken higher doses of creatine, even clients I've worked with and then got off of it, their body is still producing enough creatine because that's such an essential nutrient within the body. If the body stopped producing that, I think you'd have some very catastrophic effects on it.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, there could be a research study out there that I'm not familiar with, but I just haven't seen anything that's had me concerned in that regards.
Okay. Now, tell us about the Sports Pharmacy Network and Performance Journey RX.
Yeah, so I'll start with Sport Pharmacy Network. The Sport Pharmacy Network, I like to look at it as a functional, almost like functional health from a sports medicine perspective. It's working to bring the sports pharmacist into that sports medicine team. Interesting background, I probably could have shared this earlier, is I got into the pharmacy world and I actually headed up the science team for 70 pharmacies in Wisconsin, whose goal is called Hometown Pharmacy, but their goal was to help people get off medications through food, movement, sleep, stress management. That's how I kind of got into the pharmacy world. And that led to the Sports Pharmacy Network, where I currently serve as the chief science officer. but we're really, like I said, our focus is bringing the pharmacist skill sets into it. Most people don't realize how much a lot of pharmacists are really good in terms of interpreting blood work and being able to say, hey, it looks like these nutrients may be low in your body. Here's something that may be helpful. Or with a lot of athletes, they may have 3 or 4 different prescribing doctors where all of a sudden they're getting medications that counteract with each other. Or third, and this is really important, is a lot of medications are banned by WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Association, or
Mm.
USADA, which is the U.S. Anti-Doping Association. So again, for me and you to take them, we're not, competitive athletes. It helps us with our health, but for a lot of athletes, that could give them a performance benefit. And there's a lot of healthcare providers who are not familiar with ones that could cause an athlete to pop um, uh, positive on like a drug test, and all of a sudden they lose their, athletic career. So that's really what the Sport Pharmacy Network is passionate about, is bringing the skill set of the pharmacist into the sports medicine team and creating on a functional health level a more well-rounded approach.
What would be an example or two of a common medication that could cause them to fail a drug test?
So some of your beta blockers, because beta blockers, they kind of lower your heart rate, so it's easier to kind of calm down. So think if I'm an archery, professional
Oh.
archery thing is for them, that has a performance benefit
Mm.
on there. There's other medications related to hormones that can be have performance health benefits. Like they can be life saving from a health perspective, but they can also have performance benefits. And so those cases, there's certain medications where what you have to do is get what's called a therapeutic use exception, which is basically something saying, hey, this is medically necessary for this athlete for their daily health and wellness. It's not used for performance benefits. Another one, one of my clients who competes at the elite professional level, he's an asthmatic, and so he
Mm.
uses an inhaler. Where those with the corticosteroids and those, or the with the inhaler, those are technically not allowed in their sport unless you have a therapeutic use exception detailing, hey, here's your, uh, I'm probably not using the right word, so I apologize here, but here's your lung capacity with it versus without it, especially during, competitive season. And so those are kind of the medications you have to be careful with. Again, there's a bunch of others, but those are just kind of the ones that pop off my head, or like some of your thyroids. I believe there's some thyroid medications you
Mm.
have to be careful with as well.
Mm. Mm. So tell us about Performance Journey RX.
Okay, so Performance Journey RX, that is my personal brand. It's I've been working on the last year. We're officially launching the website. It'll be right in 2026. But there's kind of bringing together all the stuff that I've been doing with my background. I'm very passionate about that journey. So everyone talks about the health journey. That's kind of become a big thing. And I always look at things about, I don't want people just to be healthy, but I want them to be able to perform the best at whatever they're passionate about. Whether it's sport, whether it's, I want to be able to feel like I'm locked in, dialed at work, or just general health and wellness. But my goal is, from the ages of youth all the way up to adults, that we're performing at our best with that skill set. So I always try to incorporate food, movement, sleep, and stress management. And so that's my personal business that I'm very passionate about being able to launch here as we head into 2026.
Yeah, well, we're totally on board with you. I mean, all those things are so important. Um, and one thing, as I've gotten older, I noticed that my performance has definitely, dropped over the years. Like my days squatting 500 pounds are like long gone. Um, but I've learned workarounds and stuff, and I can still have productive workouts. But I'll be saying, I used to be able to do like 20 pull-ups, you know, and I can't do that anymore, but I can do like 11. And compared to the average person my age, I'm doing really well because I've attended to these things over the years. And what I see as a radiologist is like most people my age they're not in very good condition. Um,
Mhm.
and I think it's just unfortunate, and I don't think that you necessarily have to be like a maniac and devote your whole life to working out. It's just these simple strategies, get some regular activity, make the right food choices, get a good sleep. I think it makes all the difference in the world.
Oh, absolutely. And, there's so much that you can do from a lifestyle standpoint. I often feel that, and I say this with, I'm trying to think how I want to say this. I find a lot of people are medicating, or I say this with no judgment. That's where I'm looking. I say this with zero judgment because I know everyone's in a different place in their life, and I always want to respect there. But I find that a lot of people are medicating what are just lifestyle type deficiencies.
Yes.
And I think that's a great. I mean, when you said that, like, hey, I used to do 20, now I can only do 11. So, but at least I'm so good for my age. First thought that popped in my mind is if we took the average male here in, I'll just say the U.S. And if we had that average male do 11 pull-ups, I guarantee you it'd be a minority that could do that. So, I mean, you're performing better at your age than what the average 20-year-old is. So, I mean, I think that's
Mhm.
phenomenal
No,
with things.
thanks.
And
Yeah.
so I want to compliment you on that because you are doing, you're performing great, especially versus, most 20-year-olds. So I want to compliment you on that. And two, I always think about, and this kind of goes back to performance journey and ties together, sport pharmacy on there is, the lifestyle. I think about, I see so many people right now. This is a very real problem is I see so many athletes I work with who have ADHD type symptoms.
Mhm.
And what I often find is, uh, that a lot of them just aren't sleeping well. They don't have good sleep hygiene. They aren't eating well. They aren't having these issues. Um, and once we clean up those issues, it helps them get off medications. They don't have, I know ADHD medications can kind of put people on loops at times with how they're feeling. And going back to the sport world where I really got into it was so many clients that I was working with, they got put on the medications. They've lost their appetite. Now that they lost their appetite, they couldn't train hard. Now they start getting depressed. And so that's where I'm really passionate on this whole performance journey aspect is what can we use to bring together all these sets to help somebody perform at their best at whatever stage of life that they're in.
Yeah. And one of the things that I try to impart to people is it's really important to take stewardship for your own health.
Yeah.
Your car's not going to run for 20 years if you never do some preventative maintenance on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a big problem in that we put too much faith on the healthcare system to make us healthy when really it comes down to the day-to-day choices we make. You've got way more leverage over your likelihood of being healthy by just doing the things that we're talking about
Yeah.
than you do by just going to the doctor for every little ache and pain.
I love that. And you spurred two thoughts in my head is what, sometimes I'll get people ask me about the COVID and whatever people think. I told you that's your opinion. I respect there, but I'm like, the one good thing that came out of COVID was if I look at the last 5 years since COVID versus the previous 15 working with clients, the number of people who are willing to put their health in their hands and try to find answers. I get way more people asking me about general health and wellness in the last 5 years, probably tenfold versus the previous 15 combined. So, I mean, I love going to your point is this, the taking control, the ownership of what you're having. And I think too, I don't think people realize very simple things can be extremely impactful
Mhm,
on their
mhm.
lives. Like it's not like you have to go from, up to the Mr. Olympia level or, the Iron Man or Iron Woman triathlon, but being consistent with doing the basics. And, it's interesting. I was just up in Toronto working with some clients who brought me up there and I was talking with, coaches and athletes. I'm like, the difference that I see between if you want to say, I was asked, what do you think is the difference between your elite professional at whatever you're doing versus just the very average person? They think it's some amazing skill, and yeah, sometimes it may be, but I'm like, the biggest difference that I see is that the people at the elite of whatever profession they're at, be it sports, be it business, be it, just general health, as a doctor, patient, whatever it may be. I'm like, the best and the best, they just do the fundamentals better than everyone else.
Mhm, mhm.
So it's not like this very shiny star that makes them so unique. I mean, given they have some unique stars, right? But I'm like, they just do fundamentals better than everyone else. And I think if on a daily level, if people can just implement the fundamentals and get really good at the fundamentals, that will take them so far on their performance journey.
Yeah, the basics cannot be undersold. I remember that you probably heard the story about Vince Lombardi. He was the coach of Green Bay Packers back in the 1960s or something. And he was a big on, we got to master the fundamentals. And he would start every season, first session, gentlemen, this is a football. right? Just start with the basics.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that that's absolutely true. And I think people are looking for that shiny silver bullet,
Yeah.
and they want that magic potion
Oh,
that's going to make them better, when really it's like, get a good night's sleep, eat your
oh,
fruits and vegetables. Like, it's so important. And one of the things that just irks me, and I'm not saying there's no place for
no.
what I do. I mean, I enjoy what I do as a radiologist. I love digging into some complex imaging case and figure out what's going on. But uh, it's just, that's the whole thrust of it, though. It's pills, tests, and surgeries without,
Mhm.
well, why did you get this problem, or how can we prevent you from getting
Uh-huh.
problems? And lifestyle medicine just cannot be under or overstated in how
Yeah.
powerful it is.
So
Um,
powerful.
yeah,
So powerful.
but well, anyways, that's been a great conversation.
Uh-huh.
How can people get in touch with you?
So for anyone who wants to get in touch with me, they can find me on Instagram. My handle on that is Performance Journey RX. My website, which will be launched here in 2026, probably right around January 1st, that's just performancejourneyrx.com, where people can learn more about what I do on there. And to Facebook, I'm active on there as well. So I encourage people to reach out. I always enjoy conversations and chatting with people who are passionate about health, wellness, and performance.
Well, that's great. Okay, well, on that note, thanks for joining us, and perhaps we can do it again sometime.
Hey, I would love to. Thanks for your time, Dr. Lee.
You're welcome.